Okay, so in the first chapter we have seen how to set up our initial project to construct Express.js backend. So in this chapter we are going to look more forward into how to perform CRUD operations using REST API. So let's see what is this REST architecture. So REST is basically stand for representational state transfer, which means it's sort of an API that is exposed to the public. Then other backend services or any other front-end services can call to that API and consume data. So API stands for Application Presentation Interface. Basically, it's an interface that is exposed to the public. So as you can see, REST is basically separate API into logical resources and their respective functions, which means if you look at these two URLs, you can see first one is localhost 3000 post and the second one is localhost 3000 but it's user. So post is a specific resource that is corresponding to handle the functionalities related to post, and user is another resource to handle any other functionality that is relevant to specific user. So in a REST API we can distinguish these two separate functionalities with the corresponding URL, right? So these resources can be added or they can be removed to construct different APIs. So when it comes to the second feature of REST architecture, it is basically expose standard URLs for resource access, which means there is sort of a standard format. You have to define URLs in order to construct a proper REST API. So for example, let's say this is HTTP localhost 3000 post all, which means this first segment is basically the base URL of your website or your service, and this post is stand for any sort of a service or any sort of a specific resource component that you have, and all these stand for sort of a specific function within that resource, right? So generally these sort of a URL can be used for consume all the post into your any other backend services or front-end component, right? So likewise, if you construct a proper URLs, then you can get sort of an idea about what it is stand for. And the third feature is basically it uses standard HTTP method such as get, post, patch and delete to perform generic operations such as create, retrieve, update and delete, right? So basically what we are going to do is over here is so these REST APIs are consuming or they are returning objects using HTTP protocol. So using that HTTP methods we can perform our internal backend functions, right? So let's say if we wanted to create a specific data component in our backend, what we can do is we can call the post method within the HTTP body and we can pass the data inside of that HTTP payload. Then backend will consume it and it will perform the corresponding create operation over that payload, right? Then if we wanted to retrieve a sort of a data, what we can do is we can call a get method by using HTTP get header, and inside that body we can return the corresponding data what we want, right? So that's how REST API uses HTTP to invoke the backend functions. Okay, so this is a sort of an example that I was going to explain. So basically you can see in the left side we have several resource URLs, and in the right side you can see we have several functions, and let's say this post is a specific resource that is defined within our backend. So let's say if you wanted to get a specific post, we can instantiate this this request to our backend, right? So let's say a post /123. So 123 stands for the specific ID of a post. So once we invoke this URL, what happens in the backend, basically it will call this URL, this function get post by ID, and it will return the corresponding post for us. Likewise, the post stands for the creating a specific post in our backend. So what we have to do is basically we have to invoke post method, and we have to send this body. Then backend will execute create post method, and it will persist this object that is sent inside the body of the HTTP payload, right? Then if you wanted to update a specific post, what we can do is basically we can call patch URL. So the patch is basically HTTP method, and with that HTTP method, if you call this same URL again, it will basically update the post, but we have to send the specific content as well that is needs to be updated, right? So you can see in the get method and the patch method, we have the same URL, but it performs different activities. So it happens basically because we are using this specific HTTP methods, right? So if we use HTTP get, the backend knows it needs to be called this method, and if we use HTTP patch, the backend knows we need to execute update post method, right? So that is the use case of how we use these HTTP methods to override our backend functionalities, or to invoke our backend functionalities. And then in similar fashion, we can use HTTP method delete with the respect to URL, and it will invoke delete post function that may delete a specific post, right? So it is quite simple to construct a REST API to perform a generic CRUD operations in your backend. Okay, so that is the underlying idea of this RESTful APIs and REST architecture, and in the next video I will show you how to practically do this stuff on Express. Okay.